Hello should I even do an intro? So yeah, let's begin. They're on the move. The ever-encompassing silence that clouded the spectator room was broken by Snipe. Their eyes looked at the scene in front of them. The hero team was in the eastern district of the Mach City investigating. They finally realized that the only place that had little to no damage, meaning the likelihood that Izuku was residing there, was high. The teachers watched silently. Izuku was still nowhere to be seen or heard, most likely at an area where their camera feed wasn't working. The hero team had already decided to go after Mei and Eri, thinking that was the best option, and the teachers couldn't disagree more. They still have a chance to turn around. Do you think they will take it? Toshinori's eyes carried a large amount of trepidation as he watched his students float from building to building. It's not possible. They already made their choice, and I don't think Bakugo will let them anyways. Sighing, Aizawa rubbed his eyes. His students were making a mistake, but what's worse, they are following a leader who has shown nothing but hostility, and a leader who has only had a mostly negative impact throughout the entire game, even if they know it's wrong. What happened now was entirely out of their hands. They could only watch their students bring about their own destruction. Although they knew this nervousness built up each time they got closer to Mei, Eri, and Ibara, the trio currently spending time in the apartment. They stayed silent, just waiting as the hero team took another stop. Uraraka used this time to rest up and contain the drawback of her quirk. It was during this break that they heard the hero team arguing, though it was one-sided. Ida's protests were squashed by both Bakugo and Shinso. Are we really doing this? Four Eyes, shut your fucking mouth and stop being a pussy. Those little bitches are our ticket to victory. You agreed to our plan, Ida. Now isn't the time to turn back. Still, we are targeting Hatsune and Eri, a little girl. We shouldn't be doing this. The plan isn't up for discussion, you fucksticks. The teachers heard everything, and their disappointment grew each time they heard the team speak to each other. They were so broken. There was little cooperation, and what was there was built off the role of dominance. The fact that Eda knew and reasoned that they were doing something horrible furthered those feelings. Nezu sat back in this game. If they do this, Midoriya can use it to his advantage just like everything else. Nezu looked at the other city camera, taking his eyes off the heroes. In just a short span of time, Izuku turned the city into his playground, into his sanctuary. In reality, he was prosecuted, hated, but now he was a god to the civilian students. That was another aspect that hit Nezu hard. Had this Mach City just been robots, he could understand how they might be converted, but he also twisted the minds of real ones. The way Izuku spoke drew people in. When Izuku was Deku, he too had this skill, not at this level, but now that he was Lucifer, it was dangerous. The heroes went one by one, building by building. At least we know that the recon heroes know how to do their job. 13 Look for the bright side of the current situation. In a game where the heroes have only made mistakes, it was these little things that made the teachers feel that at least their students did learn something from their instruction. That is a highlight, but when paired in an incompetent plan such as this, all of that goes to waste. Power Loader, however, couldn't help but give his input. It was true, no matter how strong, fast, or smart you are, a bad plan is a bad plan. This was coming from a teaching and personal standing. Power Loader hated the fact they were targeting Mei, not only her but a young traumatized girl. Much like how Vlad looked at Izuku like a villain, he is looking at the hero team the same way. Anxiousness built up within the room. The WWP minus Mandalay and Kota had nothing they can say. Sure, they helped teach the kids, but that was for their quirks, and while they thought they were an excellent class filled with future heroes, this escalation and plan to provoke an Izuku that was unlike any they have ever seen was driving their opinion down. The heroes moved until they reached Izuku's apartment complex. Power Loader looked toward Bakugo's gauntlet on the screen. He could tell that with the repairs, the primary function of it was not working. If he tried to use it, more than likely it was going to blow up in his face. Aizawa leaned forward as they moved, Bakugo separating the team before Shoji ripped the door off the hinges. The team moved down floor by floor. Aizawa's knee bounced. He couldn't keep it still as he looked to Mei and Eri. No, please stop. Deku. Aizawa shook his head, closing his eyes, hearing Eri's screams. The game brought back unpleasant memories. Aizawa holding Izuku to the floor of the dorm, Eri screaming as she cried, being taken away by Midnight and Vlad. That was the first time Aizawa remembered what Izuku looked like at that time. His eyes filled with several emotions, but most notable the rage of 1,000 men. Aizawa now at this moment knew that had he not already placed the cuffs on Izuku and he had been who he is now, Aizawa would have found himself in a hospital bed. Seeing his students not only target Eri and now Mei, who he knew Izuku cared for, he can only imagine what would happen, and none of it was good. The team moved through the halls, Gyro and Shoji listening through doors, trying to find the recognizable voices of their targets when they stopped at Izuku's door. Midnight bit her lip while Snipe took off his hat. They weren't the only ones who had prepared themselves as present. Mike took his glasses off while the rest got ready in their own way. Nezu unbuttoned his suit to allow himself to breathe, his paw covering his mouth just underneath his nose. The heroes were preparing for their infiltration as the girls were busy conversing. Mei and Eri sitting at the dining room table, Eri in Mei's lap smiling as she grabbed a grenade-like cylinder. Mama, what are all of these for? Be careful with that baby, Eri. But these are all babies I made for your papa. I want to make something for papa too. Of course, Mama will teach you all about babies. We'll be the super duper duo inventors. Despite what was going to happen, Power Loader smiled slightly. He knew Izuku would take care of them, so while he was a little less worried, hearing Eri wanting to become an inventor brought a smile on his face. But it was wiped away as Mei put the grenade down. And the door to the apartment burst open. They watched as Ibara sprung into action using her vines to defend Eri and Mei while also providing an escape, destroying a part of the wall. Aizawa looked to the heroes on the rooftop. They were shaken at the sudden rumbling, but they were ready. This move allowed Ibara to get attacked, however. Power Loader watched as Bakugo used the advantage of his gauntlet blowing up to hurt Ibara's defenses enough for Ida, who while injured still had enough speed and power to kick and knock out Ibara, who launched into another room. Power Loader watched carefully as Mei and Eri looked on before Mei grabbed the grenade, pulling the pin before protecting Eri from jumping out of the destroyed wall. The support hero cringed as the grenade went off the teachers, hearing the high-pitched ring, but his discomfort only increased as Mei's face twisted in pain, hitting the ground hard. Having to protect Eri, Mei took all the damage, her skin scraping and some places starting to bleed. Bakugo, despite not being able to see or hear, yelled out for the rooftop team to pursue, which is what they did. Their pursuit wasn't one of note to the teachers. It was very hasty and not planned. Had it been someone with an actual combative quirk, it's possible they wouldn't have caught up. But that in itself caused another problem. Aizawa saw the students restrain Mei in a way that shouldn't have been done. They hit the girl in the legs with sharp scales, before Kirishima, who was much stronger than she, put Mei into a hold covering her mouth. It looked exactly what a criminal would do, and it was unnecessary. Unlike Izuku or Ibara, where a fight was more than possible, Mei didn't have the capacity to take them head on. The only thing that could make it worse was the exact reminder of what Aizawa had done. Eri was watching as another group of people took her mama, much like how he took her papa. Let mama go. Midnight wiped her eyes. This really got to her, watching Eri, traumatized, scared, her mama's blood on her face, trying to fight back against someone who hurt and was trying to take her away, really hit Midnight where her heart was. She wasn't alone, as the teachers and heroes in the room could only listen and watch Eri struggle. Aizawa put his head down and into his hands, gripping his hair. Fuck. First it was Overhaul taking her real parents away. Then it was him taking her new papa, and now it was the other hero students taking her mama. Just how much could they do the same thing to this little girl and not expect her to break down? He looked back up just to see Uraraka tap them, floating away. Eri, Mei, and the team effectively taking them, while the civilians around rallied, though they made no moves due to their fear of causing harm to Izuku's family. Bakugo's team in the apartment finally came to. Gyro, however, was injured. Her last remaining ear had her on the ground again. Mei's grenade was the tipping point for Gyro to be completely eliminated. Nezu put his paw up. Gyro is eliminated. Responding to Bakugo, who had seen Gyro's ability to continue, was none. The heroes, however, made one crucial mistake. They left Ibara alone. The girl slumped over in the room adjacent, blood leaking from her head and onto her clothes. It was a stupid mistake that was surely going to come back to bite them. Midoriya is back. Tiger brought everyone's attention to the sewer cameras. Izuku walked out of the area that they couldn't hear or see. His eyes calculated as his shoes echoed in the tunnel. The clicking of his heels on the splashing water brought only dread as he looked back to the apartment scene and watching as the hero team was tying up Mei and Eri. Izuku walked out of the tunnel. The city itself was in disarray. Word spread fast that Lucifer's apostles had been taken. Izuku seemed to have noticed something wrong as he immediately shot off to the apartment, witnessing what happened. When he saw Ibara, he spoke, asking what happened. The heroes showed up, attacked me after I told Hatsum to run. I failed you. Ibara's response elicited no response other than Izuku turning away, walking out. The teachers saw Ibara stretch her hand out, grasping at air, her pained voice coming with tears in her eyes. Lucifer. It was clear that Izuku giving her nothing but the silence was worse than scolding her for her failure. For someone you look up to and follow to turn their back, not even acknowledging you or your mistake, must hurt heavily. Izuku looked at the hole and the gear scattered on the floor and debris ruining the quaint apartment. They saw his fist clench, but what caught them off was the smoke leaking from the mask, the pillars twisting and turning, making Izuku look all the more intimidating. He's awakened another quirk. Nezu shook his head, unaware that this wasn't the only quirk, as the Izuku's lightning came to life, striking the floor, leaving burn marks on the wooden floor, smoke being blasted out of his mask intensely, his back also leaking, smoke clouding the area. Things only escalated as Izuku looked at Mei's laptop, watching the camera feed of the Hero HQ. The teachers shrank as Izuku narrowed his eyes, turning to his side. The teachers being overcome with surprise as the smoke in the room seemed to attach to what looked like 4 people. Tell me how to use your quirks, I'll need them. The teachers watched features form. A man with his face hidden in a large coat, a man with a scar running down his eye, another who had the top half of his raise covered, and finally a figure Toshinori had his eyes widen up to. Although it wasn't clear, he would never forget the face of his master, her long flowing hair and beauty mark. Tears sprung in Toshinori's eyes as he whispered his master's name to himself. Nana. Though they couldn't say it aloud, it was clear that Izuku, all those times he seemed to be speaking to nothing but dead air, he was actually speaking with apparitions only he could see until now. This is the dumbest thing we could have done. Midoriya will come here. He will hurt us, and we'll all be in hospital beds. Our hero career's over. Nezu turned his head to the hero team. Mei was angry, and Todoroki was distraught about what they had done, knowing the outcome was going to be horrible. As if Izuku heard this, he blasted off into the streets below, already talking to the citizens around. Aibara was slowly getting up, her tears dripping down her face. Lucifer, I'm sorry, please. Aibara walked out of the building using her vines to reach Izuku, kneeling as she grabbed tightly onto the sleeve of his suit. Lucifer, please, let me redeem myself. I failed you. I failed God. Aibara was completely brainwashed to the point where she thought failing Izuku was turning her back on her faith. The teachers watched as Izuku put his hand on Aibara's head. You have one final chance, Aibara. Fail now and God's wrath will be upon you. If you are to succeed, your place in heaven is assured, and in the afterlife, I will carry you to the pearly gates myself. Aibara, smiling, disturbed the teachers not because it was twisted or horrifying, it was merely the fact of how easily Aibara conformed to Izuku's words as though it were the supreme law. There was no critical thinking or suspicion from the vine-haired girl, instead her vines tied around her head, Aibara detaching them as they became a brown thorn crown that dug into her head, causing her to bleed more, the blood flowing around her eyes as if they were trying to match her tears. A true symbol of conviction and loyalty to Izuku. They saw Izuku satisfied before he turned around, looking to all the citizens. Hear me. The heroes have taken those who I hold dear to me. They trample upon this city and my name with their blood-soaked shoes, causing nothing but harm. We have given them the chance to redeem themselves and their crimes, however they refuse. They have attacked me and attacked you. If you are to save this city, stand with me. No longer shall they remain. We will crush them and save our city together. Raising his fist in the air, Izuku took over All Might's pose, but instead of a symbol of victory and triumph, it was a rallying cry. We march upon the Hero HQ now. Grab what you can. Tell all who cross our path. The time for justice is now. The civilians cheered loudly. Nezu nodded his head. Seems as though I was correct. What do you mean, Nezu? In shock, Present Mike turned to the principal, who switched every screen to the Hero Tower and surrounding area. The civilians have already chosen Midoriya's side. He is their savior, and with the increased violence, one that was open enough to start a manhunt on Shinso, this was the only outcome. Midoriya was waiting to use the people as a final push. The hero team is done for. All of you be on standby. Looking to Bakugo on the screen, Nezu closed his eyes. It's time for the heroes to pay for what they have done, not to Lucifer but to Midoriya himself. The end was near for the game, and all the staff could do was prepare. This was going to cause everything to change. If the game is true to end soon, Izuku will not be holding back. It was going to be dangerous. The thundering sounds of hundreds of footsteps blasted throughout the observation room. Every screen pointed at a large cloud of smoke that threatened to eclipse the entire Mach City. Shadows were seen moving through the gray clouds. Though not one was detailed, however, from what they could estimate, the entire city was marching, and they were all sure Izuku was in front, leading his followers into the upcoming battle. Nezu could only think to himself, his mind recalling everything he has learned in his life. What was happening now wasn't a war, it was a crusade. Those rallying were nothing more than a large group of zealots, all unchanging in their faith to their savior. It was a death sentence to the heroes. They were trapped in an unwinnable situation. They could hurt civilians, but their reputation would be destroyed, and there was no way they could take on every citizen in the city at once, meaning they will be overrun. The other option wasn't any better. If they are to do nothing, they will be only accepting their punishment. No matter what, it was just as Nezu said, they were done for. The teachers, just as Nezu instructed, were ready to intervene, their hero gear tightly adjusted to their bodies, their eyes watching the screens carefully as the heroes watched the smoke slowly dissipate. The cloud near the base of the hero tower close enough to show the scale of how large the army of citizens was marching. As expected, Izuku and Aibara were up front, Aibara still bleeding and Lucifer's eyes looking at the hero building, mask on, stopping as he raised his finger, pointing. Heroes, you have forced my hand. You have taken those I hold dear to me. We will not show mercy. Your reign of evil ends now. Katsuki, Bakugo is mine. Take the others, crush them where they stand. The heroes were completely stunned. Shinso admitted their plan failed when Bakugo grabbed onto Mei and Eri, roughly his hand gripping Eri's neck tightly, hurting the girl, and Mei being placed in a chokehold. This was the kid you guys accepted into Class 1A. The kid you stood up for All Might. What a disgusting joke. Power Loader looked at Aizawa, Nezu, and Toshinori in disappointment, using a child and innocent girl as human shields. Scoffing, Power Loader crossed his arms. What is the difference between what Bakugo is doing and Midoriya? Vlad looked to his fellow teacher. The two biased teachers were clashing. For starters, Bakugo is hurting a little girl who was cut open, torn apart by a madman, limb by limb manufactured into a weapon to hurt people. Midoriya has shown us who the students we accept are, or should I mention Kosei as a prime example? Midoriya is nothing like the person Bakugo is. Power Loader watched Vlad shut his mouth. You fucking extras, get ready. And fucking stop those bastards. Shut the fuck up and stop crying. The sounds of Eri's crying and Bakugo's screaming flooded Vlad's ears. The teacher looking at Power Loader. He couldn't say a thing, so he looked away. Aizawa, Nezu, and Toshinori were still processing Power Loader's words. The principal was already evaluating what type of kids he has been letting into his school, and looking to Bakugo, there were changes that need to be made. Aizawa was upset. He let the potential Bakugo had blind him to who the boy truly was. He was ashamed of himself, and Toshinori was in the same boat. Toshinori wanted to believe Bakugo was a hero at heart, but after what has happened, he couldn't believe it was possible. The situation kept getting worse. Todoroki yelled out to Bakugo, Bakugo, let them go. That's what they want, can't you realize that? You're only making things worse. Shut the fuck up, icy hot. I won't let that Deku win. No matter how many extras get in my way, I'll stomp him into the fucking ground. The pounding on the Hero HQ windows was like a war drum, the cracks that formed bringing the game closer and closer to its ending. Izuku had been gone now, waiting atop the Hero HQ, peering over the edge as Ibara gouged the earth with her vines, ensnaring the sides of the building with her vines, the thorns carving their own path. They ain't gonna fight. Snipe shook his head. The hero team looked hopeless. They clearly had given up, dropping their gear to the floor. Mina dropping to the ground, Ida sitting down, and the others staring blankly. Especially now. Izuku started flooding the building with smoke. He's cutting the hero's vision off. No, he's cutting Bakugo's vision off. Izuku knew that the heroes wouldn't fight, so to Nezu, Present Mike's assessment was off. The glass finally broke. The civilians rushing and grabbing the heroes, dragging them across the glass-covered floor, cutting them, blood coating their bodies as they were dragged to the streets. Their brutality is unending. Toshinori looked at the civilians stomping on the downed heroes. To him, they took inspiration from Izuku's shows of pure strength, the skin of the students already bruising, until Ibara took control, stringing the heroes up, crucifying them. Dear God. Vlad took a step back. Ibara wasn't there anymore. The girl who had been quiet and morally guided was now some twisted amalgamation of Izuku's twisted thinking and manipulation. Ibara displayed the heroes, but that wasn't the end of it, as Izuku had finally started to move, to jump into the air before crashing down to the ground floor. What smoke was in the room clearing out by the shock wave of his arrival. There came a big surprise. The teachers could clearly see that while Bakugo was angry, there was a surprising amount of fear in the boy's eyes. And it only got worse as Izuku showed himself. Bakugo seemed to try and bolster himself, yelling out to Izuku, "So you finally show up, huh, Deku? Come back for your slut and little bitch. That's it, huh? How the mighty have fallen. What happened, Kakin? You used to be so strong, so powerful. You didn't need any help. No, you were the help, yet here you are using hostages to win. I thought you were going to be the #1 hero. Well, that's what you wanted to be, right? Too bad that won't happen." Izuku's lack of reaction, and instead spitting a threat to Bakugo, showed just how much ahead Izuku was. What does he mean that won't happen? 13 turned to the others, waiting for a response. Bakugo has proved time and time again that his admission to this school was a mistake. I've already made the decision that after this game, Katsuki Bakugo, Aldera Middle School, Kosai Tsuburaba, and Inko Midoriya will be investigated and prosecuted. Bakugo and Kosai are to be expelled immediately after the game is over. Nezu sighed. This decision was one that had to be made. Izuku had shown him that there are some students in UA that don't belong. Aizawa and Vlad looked at Nezu but didn't say a word. They couldn't say it, but Nezu was right. People like Kosai and Bakugo don't deserve to be a hero. Wanted. You fucker, I will be the #1 hero. A Deku like you has no say in what I will be. I'm better than you. I've always been better. Just because you got a quirk now doesn't mean you're better than me. I'm more powerful than you'll ever be. There was a time I would have agreed. But all I see now is a kid who caused All Might to retire, who was too weak to fight anyone who was even remotely tougher than himself. You're just a scared little boy, isn't that right? Grah. I'm not weak, you're fucking weak, you quirkless piece of shit. I should have fucking killed you in Aldera, you fucking scum shit-stained quirkless bastard. No wonder your father left you, you fucking waste of space. I wish Inko finished the fucking job and murdered you while you slept. The conversation carried on through the speakers, so Bakugo knew of Midoriya's abuse and added onto it. Ragdoll spoke from the section she was sitting in. She didn't know the students like the teachers had, but that didn't matter. She is a hero, and what Bakugo had basically admitted to made him a villain. She had to fight the tears in her eyes. Had she been quirkless as a kid like how she is now, her life would have been hell. She wasn't even sure she would have survived. Nezu listened, and his decision cemented. He was finally going to make a decision that benefited the school and take a dangerous person out of a position of power. Clearing this from his mind, Nezu saw Mei digging into her back pocket, grabbing onto something as she signaled Izuku. It begins. All heads turned to hear Bakugo scream in agony, Mei driving a sharp screwdriver into Bakugo's thigh, twisting it before elbowing Bakugo in the nose. With some of her movement free, Mei got Eri out of the way. This was the perfect opportunity for Izuku to attack, which he did. His hits noticeably harder than any other time before Izuku tossed Bakugo out of the broken windows, causing him to hit the asphalt of the streets, his ankle snapping and shoulder dislocating. The heroes recoiled as Bakugo slid across the ground, parts of Bakugo's flesh and blood stretched on the ground. The teachers stayed silent, watching the carnage. Izuku breaking Bakugo's leg, the appendage bending in a way that wasn't natural. Though stop this before it gets too far. Nezu looked to the teachers, sending them out of the room. It was time to intervene. Izuku wasn't going to stop until Bakugo was either broken or killed. Going back to the screens, Nezu saw Mei and Eri being freed by the citizens who led them to Ibara, opening a clear path, Mei and Eri hugging each other as Mei limped. Nezu was distracted, however, once he heard Izuku speak. Remember this, Bakugo. I'll make you feel the pain you inflicted on me for years. Using Mei and Eri as hostages, I'll fucking break you in half. Stand, you piece of shit. Izuku was holding Bakugo up like a sack. Nezu watched Bakugo open his mouth. Don't. Nezu pleaded to nothing as Bakugo spit blood into Izuku's face, pushing the boy over the edge with his words. Why, you're in nothing, you quirkless bitch. You should be glad I let you even look at me. Just watch, he'll make dreadlocks and that orphan call me daddy in no time. Aizawa, get there now. Yelling into his earpiece, Nezu wanted the heroes to hurry as Izuku kicked Bakugo through a building, Bakugo spitting up blood as his back was shredded by shards of glass. Izuku pursued and Nezu was scared. Bakugo might die. It was a possibility that could very well become a reality. Izuku's brutality continued, dragging Bakugo across the road with extreme speed before using his strength to run Bakugo through multiple buildings. Nezu could only listen to Bakugo's yells of pain. There was nothing Nezu could do but hope the staff got there in time. Still, Nezu's hope died each moment as Bakugo was slammed on the ground. Izuku stepped onto Bakugo's neck hard before getting on top of him, slamming his plated knuckles down hard. He beat me down every day, breaking my body until it could barely function, and then walk off into the sunlight, knowing no one would step up to you. So how does it feel? How does it feel? Nezu saw the rage Izuku had been holding back. He thought he saw it when Izuku targeted the members of the hero team, but compared to now, the injuries the others suffered were almost like a favor. Bakugo was a complete mess, his body, face, covered in cuts, bruises, and blood. It didn't take long, but Nezu heard the words he never expected Bakugo to utter. SSTOPP. Please stop. Stop. Did you stop when I begged? Did you stop when I lay on the ground for hours because of what you did? Stop when you caused irreparable damage to my fucking body. Fuck you. Nezu put his head down, staying quiet. He refused to look anymore. Aizawa rushed alongside the other teachers. They were trying to reach Bakugo's location fast as he could. Damn it, problem child, don't do it. Aizawa didn't want what life Izuku could live to be thrown away just because of someone like Bakugo. He didn't want the one student who can truly change the world to rot inside a prison. He didn't want to watch Eri and Mei witness Izuku going away for life. The group rushed until they found a trail of destruction, and that's where he spotted him. Izuku was taking the device on Katsuki's chest off, putting away his weapons before turning away. Nodding to the others, Aizawa dropped down, Vlad going to Bakugo while he looked to Izuku. Midoriya, go ahead, take him. Let him heal. Just be glad I didn't kill him. Now I still have a game to finish, so if you will excuse me. Aizawa started as Izuku jumped away. Turning back to Bakugo, Aizawa went over to the boy, kneeling to him. Jesus Christ. Standing, he was about to order the others to take Bakugo when the boy suddenly started making noises. Looking, Aizawa saw something alarming. Izuku had put so much strength into stepping on Bakugo's throat he crushed it. He silenced a dog who couldn't stop barking. Shit. Getting back on the floor, Aizawa startled the others. Power loader. I need something sharp. And something with a tube now. The teacher reached to the utilities strapped to his body, digging out a box cutter, but they were still missing one of the most important things. Handing the box cutter to Aizawa, the teachers rushed before midnight, spotted a restaurant running inside. Grabbing several straws, her mind finally caught up to what has happened. Getting everything ready, Aizawa put the point of the box cutter to Bakugo's throat, making an incision cutting into Bakugo's windpipe. Quickly, he used the straw to insert it inside Bakugo's throat, blood spurting out before Bakugo's chest started rising, meaning he was breathing once again. We have to get him to Recovery Girl. Aizawa picked Bakugo up, covering his scarf and hero suit in blood. Vlad put a hand to his ear, speaking into it. Recovery Girl, we need surgery prepped now. Aizawa ran off, trying desperately to get to Recovery Girl. Holding the boy's completely destroyed body, he reached Recovery Girl's office as fast as he could, kicking down the door to the student spectator room. The students were alarmed until they saw Bakugo's condition, freezing in shock as Aizawa went to Recovery Girl's office. The door opened as he placed Bakugo down per her instruction. Hound Dog was in there, but the two couldn't speak as Recovery Girl ushered them out. Being kicked out, Aizawa looked down at himself. His entire body was coated in Bakugo's blood. Taking a seat, Aizawa stared at the floor, hearing screams of pain. Turning his head, he saw Izuku eliminate Tsu, Mina, Kirishima, Shoji, and Rin mercifully before he turned to the others, having Ibara use her vines to break and hurt what little of the students remained. It didn't take long for Nezu to speak out. The villain team wins. Aizawa turned his head to the students. They were forever changed. Nothing will ever be the same again. A crimson eye burned brightly. A calculative look etched deep within as its opposite emerald green eye matched it. Lucifer stood tall. The man stared at his reflection within the mirror before him, his white patch of hair remaining still. The suit that he usually wore lay neatly folded on the bed behind him, which left his body only covered by a pair of shorts. The markings that had once run down the left side of his body were now burned onto his right. The ever-elapsing patterns, beautiful and intricate, no section the same save for those that sat on the back of his hands. Lucifer's chest rose steadily with barely any noise escaping from his mouth or nose despite his breathing. His arm outstretched, grabbing his phone, turning the camera on. Lucifer turned until his back faced the mirror, showing the deeply carved marks from a knife that his mother used to torment him. The burns that were forever branded into him by Bakugo's hands. His markings coiled around the wounds as though they had been responding to his very thoughts, highlighting them. Raising his phone, Lucifer pressed on the screen, taking several photos, turning his body to capture all he could, saving them to his camera roll. Tossing his phone onto the bed next to his suit, Lucifer opened his balcony window, his hand grabbing onto the drone Mei had made him during the prep days. Its usefulness has not been lost to him, and as such, he moved over to his bed, leaning down to grab a black duffel bag that was on the ground next to it. Opening it, he placed the drone carefully inside, making sure it stayed hidden within one of the inside pockets. After making sure it couldn't be found or broken, Lucifer stared into the black abyss of the bag before a knock interrupted him. Turning his head, Lucifer stared at the door for what seemed like a minute, a constant stab entering his mind. He's finally here. Standing up, Lucifer looked back to the mirror, reaching up to his mask, unclasping it with a small hiss of air before it came off. Izuku set the mask down, putting it on top of his folded suit. Though once he set it down, Izuku could feel it staring at him. Ignoring it, he went to the door, grabbing and putting on a t-shirt that had been draped over his desk chair. Turning the handle, Izuku looked to see Aizawa about to knock once more. "Aizawa-sensei." Aizawa looked at Izuku, freezing momentarily before clearing his throat. "Pro Midoriya, Nezu has requested an audience between UA staff and yourself." Waiting for a response, Aizawa put a hand behind his back, his fingers nervously grasping a pair of quirk-disabling handcuffs. While it was labeled a request, it was mandatory, so if he couldn't get Izuku to go willingly, he would use force. Izuku stared at Aizawa. Danger sense was useful in determining a person's intentions. Opening his mouth, Izuku saw the teacher brace for his next words. "Let's not keep everyone waiting." Reminiscent of the day Aizawa had come to collect him for the war games, Izuku walked past the teacher, though unlike before, Izuku hit the underground hero's shoulder hard enough to almost knock the teacher off his balance. Izuku walked down the stairs, feeling Aizawa behind him. This request wasn't a surprise to Izuku. Since the war games had ended a few hours ago, it was clear to see that they were purposefully isolating him. They had sent Mei, Eri, and Ibara to get patched up before sending them to their dorms under the guise of resting. While he was kept close under the watchful eyes of the teachers, even being escorted to his dorm by Cementos in midnight. His weapons were confiscated, the guns returning to Snipe and knives to Power Loader. He couldn't blame the teachers. After what he did, it was all but natural they would do this. Walking down floor by floor, Izuku did not attempt to soften his steps. The thumping of his feet on the wood was loud before the common room of the one at dorms came into view. As he reached the bottom of the stairs, he stopped all movement. The students in the room all looked at him, their eyes quickly moving away as to not look at him. Just the mere sight of him frightened them beyond belief, especially since Gyro, Ajiro, Bakugo, and Sato were in the hospital. The thought of being right there with them was still fresh. There were only two who looked at him as his gaze swept across the room. Toru looked Izuku in the eyes. She knew no one else but him could see, so she tugged at the shirt she was wearing 3 times, signaling a message to him. Moving his head to the second person, Izuku stared at Momo. The girl had crutches right next to her as she sat at the dining room table. Her wrists were bandaged. Her leg was in a cast, and there were several rolls of gauze wrapping the epitome of beauty that once was her face. Her eyes quickly filled with fear and tears as she looked at him, but she refused to move her head like the others. She was afraid of what might happen if she were to do so. She had given up her services to Izuku, but he had yet to make any requests, which plagued Momo with waking nightmares of what would be asked of her. Taking his eyes off her, Izuku looked to the door of the dorms, continuing his previous pace to reach the door. Aizawa had silently observed the class reactions, and he couldn't blame them for feeling the overwhelming fear and guilt. In their minds, they were responsible for what they created. Aizawa could only frown as he looked at those who had been close to Izuku before he was accused. Uraraka had her head down, crying, both hands encased within a plaster cast. Todoroki, eyes bandages temporarily blinding the boy who had gone mute. Shinso, whose voice had been strained, still had the mark of Ibara's vine tightly around his neck. And finally, 8 of the boy's legs bandaged up with blood coating those that covered the forceful removal of the metallic tubes that had been there, leaving only gaping holes. Sighing, the teacher looked to the door, watching Izuku slip his shoes on. Walking to catch up, Aizawa stood by before Izuku finished opening the door, only for the chilling breeze of the night hit the both of them. Izuku walked out. The night sky overhead had very few stars visible, the bright full moon lighting the area around them. Walking forward, he heard the door behind him close as the wind blew against him, his eyes looking to the main UA building. There were barely any lights on, only enough to guide someone through the darkness. Aizawa walked by Izuku. The teacher looked to his student, eyes filled with regret, his mouth opening slightly. He wanted to apologize to Izuku, to say he was sorry for being so ignorant and for turning his back on him when Izuku's slit pupil narrowed, looking at him. The words Aizawa wanted to say caught themselves in his throat. The teacher closed his mouth. Whatever he said wouldn't mean a thing to Izuku, he saw that now. Izuku's gaze returned to the school as the pair entered before going down the hall, stopping at a specific door. The wooden divider was the only thing keeping them from the UA war room. Izuku looked as Aizawa knocked on the door twice before Nezu had called them in. Entering the room, Izuku saw every member of the staff sitting patiently at their seats, though there were quite a few who weren't a part of the staff at all, namely the WWP. Koda was not with them, however, so he suspected the boy was currently with Mei and Eri. The desk they all sat at was full, with Aizawa leaving his side to return to his seat next to Toshinori. "Midoriya, please have a seat." Nezu gestured to the chair that sat alone in the room. Izuku looked to the seat before doing as he was told, sitting down while everyone stared at him. "Do you know why we called you here, Midoriya?" "No, I don't. Is there a problem?" Izuku feigned ignorance, tilting his head slightly as though he were truly curious about why he was brought there. Sitting up, Nezu looked at the teachers near him, seeing Vlad's fist clenching underneath the desk. "Well, allow me to enlighten you." We are here to discuss your performance in the war games. Now, first and foremost, I congratulate you on winning. You have set a record that is likely to never be beaten. Thank you. It was a very useful learning experience. Turning his head to look at Vlad, Izuku smiled. Wouldn't you say, Vlad? Vlad King ran red with rage as he stood up, slamming his fist on the desk hard. You should be expelled for what you did. Twisting the mind of Ibara. Violating the image of Kendo. You're nothing but a villain. A villain? I was teaching your students what true evil is. And what of Kosai? If I'm a villain, then what is he? Surely not a hero in training. Not with the disgusting acts he commits. You are mad that I exposed your students for how weak they are. Had it been anyone but me, they would be dead, and it would be your fault. Izuku glared at Vlad, the teacher, faltering before engaging once more. My fault. Some of my students are in the hospital because of you. They should consider themselves lucky. Now they have time to reflect on what they did wrong and how incompetent of a teacher you are. Villains like the one All Might fought during the Kamino incident are nothing like me. They won't show mercy to your students. They won't stop at hurting them. They'll kill them right where they stand and hunt their loved ones down. Had it not been for me, your students would have found this out the hard way. Toshinori recoiled at Izuku's statement, thinking of how he once again failed to kill AFO that time in the Kamino ward. Vlad, on the other hand, only got angrier and angrier, about to burst when Nezu spoke. Vlad, sit down and stay quiet. Interrupt again and I will send you out of this room. Nezu's tongue was sharp and his threat was short, but it worked as Vlad slowly sat down. Midoriya, I apologize for Vlad's outburst. Now getting back to what this is truly about, your performance during the war games was superb. Your planning, execution, and methods, while violent, work. There is, however, an issue. Pulling out a file from his desk, Nezu looked to Recovery Girl, who only nodded at him. Your fight against Bakugo has placed the boy in a coma. His lung was punctured, ribs were broken, and a tracheotomy along with extreme measures of surgery to place metal to support his bones had to be carried out. Now in the rules I stated that anything permanent would disqualify you and even put your name up for expulsion, though I'm sure you know this. Izuku crossed his arms, adjusting himself. Of course, I do. However, nothing that you have described violates the rule you have placed. Bakugo's injuries will heal over time like the ones he had caused on me have. His coma, however, is entirely out of my hands. Comas in themselves are unpredictable. If Bakugo is as strong as he makes himself out to be, he'll be up in a few days. Or he could be in a coma permanently. Nezu tried to rebuttal Izuku, but that allowed him to bring up another point. And what is determined as permanent in this situation? Years can pass and he will wake up, so it isn't permanent in that scenario. He's right, Nezu. Comas are entirely up to possibility. Nothing is definite in regards to Bakugo's condition, or at least that is my standing as a medical expert. Recovery Girl agreed with Izuku. The woman, despite the predicament, stood with Izuku, and if she was being honest, always will. She had seen everything in the game, and despite Izuku introducing only more work, nothing he did was so bad that it warranted the rest of the teachers targeting him. She may have had a bias, but she couldn't help it. Remembering what Izuku went through daily, along with his past wounds, she couldn't help but think that he did Bakugo mercy even after the boy hurt Mayuri. Nezu looked to Recovery Girl, sighing slightly before he turned to Izuku again. Well, if Recovery Girl says it isn't a violation, we shall continue. During the games, we have all seen something that is of great interest. At times you were seen speaking to yourself, but we saw something that tells us you aren't alone. Would you care to share? Ninth, I believe they had seen us when you awakened my quirk, and appeared to Izuku standing in front of the boy trying to explain what his theory was. What will you tell them? What do you mean, Nezu? Talking to people who aren't there. That's ridiculous. Such a thing is what the insane would do. I'll admit I tend to mutter out my thoughts. Aizawa and the rest of the teachers here could pledge to that. Though this discussion about talking to people who aren't there is nothing short of delusional. Izuku looked past and into the principal, the animal, trying to speak, but Toshinori stood up slowly. Young Midoriya, please don't lie. I saw Nana there with you. Please tell me the truth. Toshinori's eyes were already tearing up. Nana's apparition appeared to Izuku, the woman looking at the ninth. Please, ninth. Tell him I'm here. Tell him I miss him and that I'm proud of him, please. Nana begged, pleading with Izuku, who didn't attempt to look at her, instead stared at Toshinori. Izuku sighed. As I said, what you saw is nothing more than a delusion you created to justify your thoughts about me speaking to anyone other than to myself. Though if I were to have been talking to your mentor, I would only imagine how disappointed she is. Toshinori froze, slumping back into his seat, shedding a few tears. The possibility that Nana did feel this way tore its way into the former number one hero's mind. Nana looked distraught, turning to Izuku to tell him off, but stopped when En's apparition shook his head. Nezu realized he wasn't going to get the answer he wanted or the total truth. He was trying to play chess against someone who had every piece of his taken off the board. Knowing that this was ultimately pointless, Nezu switched topics. He had one more card to play. This surely had to gain something from the enigma that was Izuku. Well, perhaps we were wrong. Now there is one thing I must discuss with you, Midoriya. I must inform you that your mother and Midoriya is currently placed in police custody. Nezu watched Izuku carefully, though he gained no visible awareness that Izuku had even heard what he said. Now Nezu tried to press further. She has given a testimony admitting to the abuse she had inflicted on you. Evidence has been found as well. A kitchen knife stained in your blood. Your mother even saying that she had used it to carve into your skin, slowly causing the numerous scars on her back. Is this correct? Izuku remained silent. He's smart but a horrible liar. She wouldn't admit to anything. Denying is what she does best. Sitting back, Izuku clenched his fist. He might as well entertain what Nezu was trying to accomplish. No. Well, she had told us that during your years of living with her she often hit you, stomping you to the ground whilst depriving you of any nutrition. There were also times that she locked you in a room for days on end. Does the name Deku mean anything to you? The heroes in the room looked at Nezu. The principal was talking about information that didn't seem to relate to anything they were there to question. I'm sure it was hard for you, Midoriya. Your quirklessness surely had caused you a large amount of trouble, particularly during your time at Aldera Middle School. You were labeled a distraction from the teachers, and your grades were subpar at best. Being quirkless does have its disadvantages, doesn't it? Nazu. Standing up, Ragdoll glared at the animal. That rat bastard was bringing up things that had nothing to do with why they were here, not to mention that she understood how hard it was to be quirkless. Stop what you're doing now. That's enough. Izuku looked at Ragdoll from the corner of his eye, before turning back to Nezu, the principal staring at Ragdoll for a second before he turned to the rest of the WWP members, and as expected they weren't so ecstatic to hear what he was saying. Yes, Nezu, that's enough. Now are we finished, or is there something else you would like to talk about? There is one last thing. It's come to all of our attention that you have obtained more than one quirk. That along with your appearance change, could you please explain? It's simple. As I'm sure you could tell, I've awakened my original quirk. OFA was only a catalyst that along with my emotional trauma allowed me access to it during the prep week that you had given us. Izuku went quiet after this. Giving away everything would do him no good. He had to lie, to keep the secret of the previous OFA users hidden. Even if he didn't have to, he couldn't trust Nezu. The animal has made his intentions clear with the talk about his abuse. As for my appearance, that is related to my quirk awakening. Having been out of use and enhanced with OFA, my quirk had adverse effects on my body, resulting in what you see now. And what of the smoke you used to cloud the city? Nezu raised a paw, trying to poke a hole in Izuku's explanation. Smiling, Izuku shook his head. I swear May can make the most wonderful inventions. Power Loader, you should be proud. She managed to contain and create several hidden smoke canisters with around 5x the amount of a normal smoke grenade. Izuku avoided taking credit for the spectacle that he had done on the last day, instead giving it to someone who can do such a thing with a crazed mind as May had. She can do such a thing. I should have expected such. Power Loader could see it, knowing how May was, and if Izuku had given her the idea, then it wasn't out of the realm of possibility. Nezu was a bit irritated. He knew what he saw. He knew Izuku was lying, but the boy said everything right, his lies believable to the point they could be interpreted as the absolute truth. It didn't take long after Nezu looked at the time. They had been there for 2 hours questioning Izuku, yet the hostile environment along with the total confusion remained constant. It came a time where Nezu was forced to end this meeting. With it ending, Izuku was escorted back to his dorm room. The plan to isolate him was still enacted. Back in his dorm, Izuku moved his suit and mask, laying down before closing his eyes. Slowing his breathing, he fell into a dreamless sleep. With Izuku gone, Nezu looked to the heroes in the room as Aizawa came back. Midoriya is still hiding the truth from us. Of course he is, Vlad yelled, staring at Recovery Girl. And Chio is still covering for him, not to mention those 4. Pointing to the WWP, Vlad's anger showed no end, his bitterness clear within the tone of his voice. Covering for him. Nezu asked questions that had nothing to do with the wargame, bringing up his mother and abuse that was underhanded even for him. You don't know what it's like being quirkless. I know you've been through a lot, Nezu, but that gives no right to say what you did. Ragdoll slammed her fist down, shaking in rage. She's right. The scars and the daily pain Midoriya suffers from is nothing you can understand. I'm not covering for anyone. I only agree with the facts presented to me. And Midoriya, whether we like it or not, has the right to keep things hidden from us. Do you think he can trust any of you after you took Eri away and arrested him? Recovery Girl looked at Vlad and Nezu before she turned to Hound Dog, who was busy staring at his notes. Hound Dog, what do you say? Midoriya has issues with trust. Talking about his past is nothing but another reason for him not giving us anything involving his past, and after what we did, expecting him to share anything at all is realistically impossible. Okay, but that doesn't change what he did to the students. Midnight finally spoke up. She couldn't ignore that. Yes, while Izuku had a reason, the way he carried everything out was above what was needed. Midnight, we have been over this. Nothing Midoriya did was permanent. The boy, if anything, was extremely lenient. Having seen what his quirk can do, surely you understand that. Cementos cut in the memory of what happened in the sports festival coming to mind almost immediately. Yet need I remind you of Bakugo's current condition? Ectoplasm shook his head. If he was so lenient, why is that Bakugo is residing in the ICU? Bakugo has made it clear that he has a hatred for Midoriya so intense that he was willing to hurt Hatsume and Eri. Are you blind? It's clear that Midoriya didn't lie, that some of his scars and burns were from Bakugo's very hands. Power Loader couldn't help but explain why Izuku did what he did. And the arguments continued, the divide between teachers growing wider and wider. Some thinking Izuku was a villain, and those who understood why Izuku's actions, while brutal, didn't classify him as evil. The debates continued into the morning until it ended, Nezu planning on discussing it further in the next few days. Yet they were all ignorant of what was going to happen. 3 days had passed, and school had been called off for months so that the students could recover, yet Lucifer stood in his dorm, the mess on the floor cleaned up while he was dressed in his suit, the material flexing as he put his mask on. With it covering the lower half of his voice, he waited for his guest to knock on the door. He had already told May that he would spend time with them tomorrow and that today wasn't the best time. Luckily, May wasn't mad, though she did make a bunch of outrageous requests to make it up to her and Uri. He wanted to be with them now, but he knew the distance was needed. Standing there, danger sense went off, alerting him to the door before it twisted open, an invisible figure walking inside before it peeled away, revealing Toru's face. "Good, you're ready? Now I'll let them know we're ready." Bringing up a phone, Toru called a single number. It ringing before she spoke out, opened the portal. Ending the call, a large purple swirl formed in the middle of the room in front of Toru and Lucifer until it stabilized. Toru, turning her head to Lucifer, nodded. "Come on, let's get this over with." Grabbing the edge, Toru stepped in while Lucifer walked forward slowly. Staring into the portal, he stuck one foot inside before he fully walked in, the portal closing behind him. There was no trace Lucifer had even been in the room prior, with the teachers and students none the wiser that their greatest asset was meeting with their greatest adversary. With that, guys, see you next time. Bye-bye.